Welcome to Tales from the Mind. We're signing off now. May God have mercy on this world. Snow filled the 19-inch television screen as Bill Crenshaw, who had just started showing his 61 years of age, stared at the screen dully for 15 minutes before finally realizing that nothing else was coming. Realizing that he was watching Endless White finally dawned on him, and a sigh of resignation as he hit the power button on the remote and turned it off. His old easy chair creaked gently as he pushed himself up and out of it, his body echoing the same noises, voicing its displeasure. Moving across the room, he used an aged finger to push down the blinds on his window. Looking out into the dark and foggy night, the world has gotten quiet. Moving across the room, he used his aged finger to push down the blinds on his window. Looking out into the dark and foggy night, the world was quiet, and with each night, when the fog rolled in, it only grew quieter. He hadn't seen anyone in almost a week, nothing human anyway. There was the occasional flitter of a shadow that moved swiftly past the windows, or something scratching at the back door late at night. But he dared not open the door at night. The nights had grown longer, the darkness holding its new evils that far outweighed those that used to live in the old world. Bill smiled. It was a humorless smile, which never reached his gray eyes. He knew, deep within his heart, that the real monster was here in his house, and it had been for a long time. With the television silent, he could hear the sounds of the house again. Old houses always had noises. Creaking floorboards, loose beams, wood that swelled and shrank with temperature. Sounds that might frighten a young child trying to sleep. Yet few houses had babbling that emitted from the basement. The babbling hadn't always been there, but since the world had grown darker, since the fog had rolled in, the babbling had started. But that wasn't the only noise that he heard. A faint whine came from the hallway closet. Bill moved through his home, opening the door, looking down into the sad eyes that only a dog could manage. He had found the dog this morning, when the fog was at its thinnest, when Bill went out looking for supplies. He leaned down, smiling at the animal and patting its back. He offered it soothing words that made the little yellow tail thump against the floor. Bill didn't even hear his own words, and tears began to form in the corners of his eyes. He lifted the animal gently into his arms, more meaningless words of hope falling from his lips onto the unsuspecting animal's ears. Bill didn't want its last moments to be that of fear. The basement door loomed before them now, and Bill stopped. His feet had become heavy. He could turn back now, stop what he was doing. Let the thing in the basement finally die. The dog could stay. The two of them keep each other company until the darkness and fog crept into the house, silencing them all forever. But he shook his head. He took a few deep breaths and began to walk forward again. He lifted the animal gently in his arms, more meaningless words of hope falling from his lips onto the unsuspecting animal's ears. Bill didn't want its last moment to be one of fear. The basement door loomed before them now, and Bill stopped. His feet had become heavy. He could turn back now, stop what he was doing, let the thing in the basement finally die. The dog could stay. The two of them keep each other company until the darkness and the fog crept into the house and silenced them forever. But he shook his head. He took a few deep breaths and he began to walk forward again. The basement door, it swung open easily, and the babbling became louder for a second before stopping abruptly. Bill placed the animal at the top step and closed the door, his words of reassurance being replaced by prayers of forgiveness. The door was closed quickly. The easy chair creaked again as Bill sat back down slowly. Now normally the television would drown out the sounds from below, but since he had turned it off, he could hear everything. The whining continued for a moment before it was replaced by frightened barks, but a sudden yelp was heard and the dog became silent. The silence didn't last long, though, replaced by a sickening, wet, sucking noise. Bill looked down at his hands, worn and calloused with age, and he reached down into the side pocket of the chair, retrieving the revolver that he had kept there. How long had he been doing this? Time had become something of a loose concept for him, something that he couldn't keep track of. All those people, women, children, men, he had tricked them into the house. Protection from the dark. It's what he offered them, but they didn't know that what the darkness was in his home. He had heard of others shooting their loved ones, remembering seeing Marty Deshawn shooting his daughter in the street. But he shook his head. He couldn't do that. He told himself that help was coming, that whatever had happened to the world couldn't last, that those who had changed could be changed back. The white static from the TV seemed to laugh at him, as if to show him that humanity was truly over due to the lack of a signal. He didn't even remember turning the television back on. He glanced over his shoulder. The sucking sound had stopped coming out of the basement. Looking back, he stared at the gun in his hands. Closing his eyes, he breathed deeply, raising the weapon to his head, feeling the cold metal pushing against his own temple. But the babbling started again, breaking Bill out of his trance, and he opened his eyes and took a sharp gasp of air. He finally resolved what he had to do. So he stands, the gun in his hand, in his mouth, set in a firm line, and he begins to move across the house. He draws closer to the basement door, its peeling white paint looming before him. He pulls back the latch and swings it open. The revolver raised in front of him, but the stairs are silent and empty, the babbling having stopped, and all was quiet. Stepping lightly down the wooden stairs, Bill keeps the weapon up, trying to make sure that the monster isn't going to attack him. Blood has begun to pool at the bottom of the steps, and Bill steps over it, reaching up, pulling on the cord that clicks the overhead light bulb on. He illuminates more of the basement and sees the dog's body nearby, jagged teeth marks showing where it had been torn apart. Bill begins to feel his dinner beginning to flop in his stomach, performing a horrible gymnastic routine. And as he can't help himself, vomit spills out and onto the cold concrete floor. He stands up straight again, imagining the creature coming for him from the darker corners of the room, realizing how vulnerable he is. He rushes for the stairs, knowing that he had no plan once he entered the basement. He stumbles back up them, slamming the door shut and closing the latch, pushing his back against the door. He closes his eyes, breathing deeply. I'll do it in the morning. He whispers to himself. The basement still silent behind him, but that's when he can hear the breathing. It took him a moment to realize that it wasn't coming from the other side of the door. He opened his eyes to see his wife standing before him at the end of the hall, waiting at the entrance to the den. Sally wasn't the woman that he had fallen in love with all those years ago, her once beautiful hair set in clumps on top of her scalp. The once radiant eyes were now listless and milky. Her lips were smeared with blood and pulled into a vicious grin that revealed the jagged and the rotting teeth. "Hello, William," she said, the words dusty and parched, passing through the throat of a dead woman. Bill could only stare, until he was finally able to begin shaking his head back and forth. "You've been a naughty boy, tricking all those nice people to come inside and see me," she says as she turns, walking into the den. Bill begins to follow her, watching as her rotting fingers trace a bloody line along his easy chair. He's still holding the gun, but it was held loosely in his hand. "I was trying to help you, keep you alive," he whispers, trailing off as he realizes that his words are falling on the ears of a dead woman. She turns, smiling at him again. "You did keep me alive," Sally tells him, though Bill knew the words were a lie. "I liked the blonde-haired girl the best. She tasted so sweet." She cackles at him. The revolver thundered in the small room, echoing off the low ceiling and the floor. He fired twice. The rounds crashed into her stomach and chest as he used the recoil of the heavy round to adjust. She was thrown across the room, her body crashing harshly against the far wall before sliding to the floor. I'm so sorry," he choked, his ears ringing as the gun became heavy in his hands. He struggled, raising it to his head, prepared to join his wife in whatever was beyond this world. But she rose up, the massive wounds in her torso spilling blood onto the floor. A scream escaped his lips as she leaped over the easy chair, baring her rotten teeth as a primal roar escaped her dead mouth. The gun thundered again and again, the bullets tearing into her body. Yet she keeps coming. Her attack comes low, slashing through something vital in Bill's legs, and he falls to the ground, a gurgled scream escaping his lips. Looking down, he can see the blood already beginning to pool at his legs. He vaguely hears Sally mocking him, stating that she is sorry in the same voice that a small child would use on a playground. He raises the gun to his chin, his eyes already beginning to glaze over. He told himself that he wouldn't become a monster. The gun clicks on an empty chamber, and he tries again. But nothing. The clicking sound would be the last thing that Bill Crenshaw heard as a human being.